the purpose of activity 42 is just to demonstrate that there's a connection between having children out of wedlock and poverty. This is related to our topic of having a large area of personal responsibility without help from government. And one of the points I'm going to make in these activities is that a lot of people put down or mock traditional morality or ways of looking at things. All I want to do here is to try to show a connection between traditional morality and reality, so that, as I understand it, traditional morality, much of it was designed to discourage people from engaging in behavior that leads to undesirable consequences, and encouraging people to engage in behavior that leads to desirable consequences. And we're just going to assume here that poverty is not a good thing, and that to the extent that it's within our ability to choose, we should make choices that will not lead us into poverty. In letter A, this study coming out of Princeton and Columbia shows that 5 years, 1 year after a non-marital birth, 53.4% of the participants were living in poverty, and 5 years after a non-marital birth, 50.6% of the participants were living in poverty. This suggests that I mean, I guess you could say, for one thing, it seems that having a non-marital birth leads to poverty. Someone might say, well, they may have been living in poverty in the first place, and that may be true. This doesn't really address that, but I'm thinking that if you are poor, having a non-marital birth does not make things any better. In fact, it makes it very, very difficult to rise out of poverty. Whereas in the U.S., there's been this history of rising out of poverty. My great-grandparents, for example, coming from Italy, started with nothing. Immigrants come to this country starting with nothing, but there is this possibility of rising up out of poverty, if not in that first generation, in the second or third generation, working their way up. But this assumes that people are going to be acting in a way that is positive and constructive and helpful. Whereas if you're in poverty and you have a non-marital birth, then it's going to become very, very difficult to work your way out of that poverty, as others have done. So letter B is just focusing on something similar, that if you focus on poverty in the U.S., in March 2007, there were 7.7 million families living in poverty, and of those 7.7 million, 4.8 million, or 62%, were headed by a single parent. So I think it's just very difficult for a family headed by one parent to rise out of poverty, and it seems to be a cause of poverty. So again, we're not subjecting anybody to ridicule, but I think it is important to understand the consequences of decisions. Walter Williams in letter C points out that if you're focusing on poverty in the black community, one segment of the black population has a 9.9% poverty rate, and only 13.7% of their children under 5-year-olds are poor, whereas another segment of the black population suffers a 39.5% poverty rate, which is huge, and 58.1% of its under 5-year-olds are poor. You see the same kind of thing going on among whites. 6% poverty rate in one segment, and a 26.4% poverty rate in another segment. He points out the only difference here is whether or not the people being counted are married or not. You can see that among married black couples and married white couples, there's very little difference in the poverty rate, but there's a huge difference between families where you have two parents and children and one parent and children. So I'm going to suggest, and this is something that needs to be thought about and talked about, that a leading cause of poverty in the United States, if not the leading cause of poverty in the United States, is having children out of wedlock. Letter D is kind of more of the same, that 55% of all families in poverty are single-parent families headed by women, and only in 17% of those families is the household head working full-time. And you can see why somebody has to be taking care of the children. So I think the reason why a two-parent family works is because you can have at least one person working and one taking care of the children would be the most traditional way of doing it. So just again, focusing on the way that behavior has consequences, and also political consequences, because if a lot of women are having children out of wedlock and are poor, then there's going to need a lot of help from governments, and that is, however else you want to look at it, not consistent with liberty, because liberty requires, in the sense we're studying, a large area of personal responsibility without help from government. And here, personal responsibility is being understood as making choices in life that have good consequences rather than negative consequences. And so that involves, as we'll see in the next activity, sometimes not indulging in something very pleasurable, because if we do, then it would have negative consequences, in this case, poverty.